tonight we are joined by Jules and Sam from Total Endurance Nutrition, who are going to be having a little chat with us right as we go through the warm-up. Now they are nutritional consultants. They're very good at their jobs. They look after some of our React athletes. So check out their website. The details will be up on the TOEC, the online events company website, as will the video from our kind of chat with Total Endurance Nutrition. So if there's anything we cover in the next sort of 10, 15, 20 minutes, and it kind of goes over your head or you want to remind yourself, the video will be available from the TOEC website, hopefully later today, if I get my act together.
Okay.
So, yeah, I just want to welcome Sam and Jules, who will be talking to us. So let me just pin that, and then we will be able to all see Sam. Hi Sam, how you doing, mate?
I'm good, thanks, Rich. How are you?
Yeah.
Paddling away?
Yeah. I live on a bike, so you know. Haven't actually been off one since we last spoke. Yeah, thanks very much for joining us, Sam. You know, we got various questions, and no doubt the guys joining us today will have potentially have questions for you. But what we just really wanted to talk about was essentially how to fuel such a ridiculous challenge as some of these guys are embarking on. And now, one of the things that we do just want to caveat anything we're about to talk with, obviously, the advice will change depending on the event you're doing. So a 3-hour time trial is obviously very different to a 24-hour time trial. No doubt the nutritional requirements are different, but I think, you know, if we just start kind of, you know, before the event, you know, the night before, I imagine one of the questions that will inevitably arise is just kind of what do you think people should be eating and drinking the night before, or the day before, depending on the time zone.
Yeah, and I think that's the main thing to think about, is leaving it till the night before is almost too late.
Yeah.
Or if you depend on the time zone, if we think about the sort of 10 hours before, then it's almost, you get into the point where it's too late, because that 48 hour period before the event starts, before you literally start pedaling for the event, that's the period where we want to load the muscles, particularly with carbohydrates. So we're trying to increase muscle glycogen stores, and the way for them to, you know, get to the point that we want them to is simply by eating a lot of carbohydrates. So for the guys who are doing like the 3 to 6 hour or the 3 hour event, or the 6 hour event, then you can get away or use probably 8 grams of carbohydrate per kilo of body weight. So most people on a daily basis will eat somewhere between 5 and 6 just through their sort of normal diet. So what we would recommend is just increasing the amount of carbohydrate that you have at each meal by about 20 to 30%, and that should bring you up to about 8 grams per kilo of body weight. Obviously, you can do a calculation. You could track what you're eating, which isn't a bad idea, using a simple app like MyFitnessPal to help you to get that amount of carbohydrate in. It's actually quite a lot when you break it down as well, and if you lay it out, let's say, it becomes a lot of food. So I think it's what I would say is that's the amount you want if you're doing the 3 to 6 hour time trials. If you go in for the 12 or even the 24, then the loading period is even more important, and it needs to be a little bit higher as well. So somewhere between 10 and 12 grams of carbohydrate per kilo body weight. So for myself, who's sort of 75 kilos, I'm immediately talking about 750 to maybe 850, 900 grams of carbohydrate in the 24 to 48 hour period prior to that event starting, if it was the 12 or 24 hour event. So obviously that is an awful lot of food. So you kind of need to plan how you're going to take that in as well, and that's why I suggest using something like MyFitnessPal app, because it's very simple to use, easy to plan and track that food. If we're thinking about the types of foods though, what I would say is you need to, on a daily basis, just a standard day, we think about using things like whole grains a lot, brown pasta, brown rice, things like that are fibrous. Now, we kind of want to ignore that and forget that approach when we're doing a carb load, because it's all about getting the carbohydrate in to your body as easily as possible. And so we want things that are low in fibre, which are taken up through the gut much more quickly, and then they find their way into your muscle where we want it to be stored in a much more efficient way. So rather than brown rice, we go for white rice. Wholemeal pasta, we'd throw that out and go for white pasta. Things like rice pudding is a really great way of loading. Cold custard or warm custard, if you like. Things like trifles are quite good. Even things like using like jellied sweets is a good way to kind of supplement and get the amount of carbohydrate that you need during that period as well. So it actually becomes maybe not too dissimilar to Christmas time, actually, in some ways, that you're kind of eating a lot of food and it's not always that great, what we would call a good diet. But
we're already carb loaded, basically. We're ready to go.
Yeah, so this is probably come at a good time of year. Yeah. So yeah, continue what you've been doing for the last 2 weeks, basically. Leading up to the event. So it's purely, thinking about simple carbs in that 24, 48 hour period beforehand. But that's really important to do that. And when I said right at the start, if you're leaving it, to the night before, it's almost a bit too late. So we should say we're talking about a UK time zone here. If you're leaving it till maybe, because the event starting in the evening in the UK. So your last sort of carbohydrate loading meal, let's say, where you're focusing on simple carbohydrates, might be sort of mid-morning to lunchtime on that day, on the Saturday. That gives your body enough time to process it and store it. If it's, if you're leaving it to a few hours beforehand, then it becomes a little bit too late, at least for that purpose of loading.
So you're talking sort of maybe those sort of pre-loading meals finishing around sort of 6 to 8 hours before, and then you move on to a different type of meal schedule. So why don't you talk us through that next? That sort of shortly before the event meal schedule. What would that sort of look like?
Yeah, so it shifts a little bit then. So again, this is going to be a little bit dependent on where you are in the world and the time you're starting. But traditionally, if we were starting first thing in the morning, when we would have slept overnight, and due to sleeping overnight, our body reduces the amount of glycogen that we can store in our liver. So we don't only store glycogen in the muscles, but also the liver, and that's really important to help us maintain blood glucose, homeostasis, like getting glucose to the brain, etc. What happens when you go to sleep at night, the amount of glycogen, which is a smaller amount than we have in the muscle anyway, but that becomes a little bit depleted. So the purpose of that pre-exercise meal is then to replenish the liver glycogen, not necessarily the muscle glycogen, but certainly the liver glycogen. So if you're starting this event in the morning, then the breakfast becomes really important to have kind of slow release carbohydrates. So we switch from the less fibrous stuff we had in the 24, 48 hours beforehand, and we move to more fibrous. So something like porridge is excellent because it's a slow release carbohydrate. You're not getting fast release of the carbs through the gut and into the body, into the blood circulation. It's much more slow, and that gradual release is important because it gives us like a stable blood glucose, and that's what we're looking for in the 2 to 3 hours before we start the event. Now, what you put with that porridge, if we're using porridge as an example, can depend. So if it's following, if you're having it first thing in the morning, then you need to include some sort of fructose with it as well. So fructose is important because it helps us replenish liver glycogen much more effectively than other types of sugars. Now, fructose is typically found in like things like honey, syrups, bananas, something like that. So a classic, pre-event meal is a bowl of porridge with drizzle of honey and a chopped banana on, something like that. So it's really, really good approach. And that, if you're in the UK, for example, you could even include something like that mid-afternoon, 2 to 3 hours before the event starts as well, because it's the same principle, is that you are trying to ensure that liver glycogen levels are topped up, whether that's following an overnight fast or not, and you're just trying to provide the body with some slow release carbohydrates that are going to see you through to the start of that event and keep everything nice and stable in the body.
It's also pretty kind on the gut, isn't it? That sort of thing as well. I know personally when I've raced in the sort of evenings, porridge for me has been a bit of a mainstay for that reason. It's something I can rely on, something I usually have for breakfast, and I know that's not going to cause me too many issues.
Yeah, I mean, I say porridge because that's what a lot of people will have before an event. Some people prefer something like rice as well, which is absolutely fine, no problem with that. But what we're not trying to do here, and this is why I say you switch to the kind of more slow release fibrous carbohydrate, is we're keeping that blood glucose stable. If you had something like a big bowl of white pasta and an energy bar 2 to 3 hours beforehand, your blood glucose would just shoot up and then shoot back down, and you'd probably be feeling pretty rotten by the time it actually came around to start the event. So we're trying to keep it nice and stable.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, that to me that all makes sense. And just to say, guys, we will be doing a little bit of Q&A kind of in a few minutes time, so if you've got your questions, just hold fire. You're gonna have an opportunity to hit them. So yeah, we talked about pre-event, and then now the really impossible question to answer, really, because of the wide variety of events we've got. What do they do during the event? We all know we're going to need to fuel, but it's quite a complicated one, I imagine. So unenviable question to answer.
Okay, so I'll jump in on that one. Rich, hi everyone. So yeah, absolutely. Fueling the events is going to vary depending on the duration of the time trial that you're kind of taking part in. So if we start with the 3 or 6 hour events, what we're probably looking to do is rely largely during those events on your kind of traditional sports products to fuel those events. So things like carbohydrate drink mixes, gels, bars, chews, essentially the types of things that you typically fuel, a training session with. And you ideally want to be looking at fueling those duration time trials in the region of around 80 to 100 grams of carbohydrate an hour. And the key thing to kind of focus on with that is to really start that fueling from the off. So, regardless of the carbohydrate.
Just to interrupt you I'm really sorry. Just on the workout, guys, we've just gone into the fast pedaling efforts. So it's up to 90% of FTP. Your cadence target is arbitrarily high, so looking for upwards of 100 RPM. Sorry, Jules, just so everyone knows what they're up to.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, absolutely. The key thing is to kind of not delay that fueling. So it's 80 to 100 grams of carbohydrates an hour, kind of from the off, really. And that's regardless of how, effective your carbohydrate load has been, whether you've got that, assuming you've got that event meal in. It's really important to get that fueling in during the event from the start, really. So right from that first hour, looking at in the region of 80 to 100 grams of carbohydrate an hour. So yeah, for those 3 or 6 hour events, just looking really at sticking to your traditional sports carbohydrate based products, really. We can probably approach the 12 and 24 hour events slightly differently. And for those events, we probably want to switch our thinking more in terms of calories an hour rather than carbohydrates every hour. So ideally for those events, you want to be getting in the region of around 500 calories an hour. Now, the reason that we're going to start to think in terms of calories is that in reality, we will probably start to include, or you will probably start to include, some more real food to fuel those events, and not rely solely on these carbohydrate-rich sports products that you might ordinarily use to fuel an event or fuel your training. So with that in mind, if you are selecting real food to fuel those events, what you want to be looking for is things that are going to be high glycemic index. So that means your fast release carbohydrates on the whole. So we're still looking for low fiber options, so very similar to the types of foods that you would have been selecting during that carbohydrate loading period. So things that might work, I guess, are things like white bread jam sandwiches or banana and honey sandwiches, things like rice pudding or custard. And then obviously it's a long time to be consuming a lot of sweet products and foods. So savoury options that might work are things like Ritz crackers, or salted crackers. A few ready salted crisps might be an option as well, or even salted instant mashed potato if you kind of feel you need more savoury options to be fueling that. But the key thing with all of those food items is that they're low in fibre, and they're going to be really fast release glucose. They're going to give you a very similar response to those kind of sports products that you would otherwise be using, but they're just a bit more tolerable over that longer period of time, really.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point at the end there. I'm an Ironman triathlete, and I can tell you and I've done like bike packing, or I've done loads of endurance stuff, and yeah, a big part of it can come down to whether you want to eat. You could have all the fueling in the world available to you, but if you don't want to eat it, suddenly you can get yourself into sticky situations. I know dealing with that, some of our athletes, that has been their history in the past. They've had good intentions, but then just not wanted to eat. So.
And I think that's the key thing, Rich, being prepared on the day with different options, so that, you might have in mind what you think you're going to fancy and what you plan to have. But I'd suggest, having some different options and some variety there, because the calorie intake, the food intake is far more important than not having anything at all, whether you fancy it or not. So being prepared and having that variety that you can kind of pick and choose from can be really helpful in terms of making sure that you've got something that you want to have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've definitely got that wrong. You just get, particularly with the short duration efforts, you get sick of the gels. Just very quickly on the workout again, guys. So we've now just shifted into like a cruising effort for about another 5.5 minutes. Now, this is intended to be the sort of effort that you might want to think about kind of planning towards for the 24-hour event. It's basically it's just slap bang in the middle of the zone 2, guys. It's not exciting. And again, just a caveat, like this is around sort of 65% of FTP. Now, you have to know yourself and where that sits within your remit, really. But it's just to get you thinking, really, about what sort of type of effort and being disciplined with it. It's very easy when you see someone going past, just throwing little surges. But you think about you're throwing in those kind of ego surges over the course of even 3 hours. Yeah, if you're not sticking to your plan, then you'll pay for it towards the end. I will be talking a little bit more about pacing, but let's stick with the nutrition chat. And I think probably one of the kind of more obvious questions that came to my mind when I was thinking about this was, what is your feeling towards caffeine? Because particularly for those this event doesn't suit them in terms of time zone. You know, I think their natural instinct is to start smashing the caffeine.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one with caffeine, and we always, you know, talk about caffeine as well is having something that you've fairly well practiced, let's say. So if we took, you know, the basic guidelines for caffeine, you'd talk about something like 2 milligrams to 5 milligrams per kilo of body weight in terms of your caffeine. Now we know that there's a huge range actually in what people do in practice in racing across this type of duration of events, and you can go from anywhere like from 2 up to something like 20 milligrams per kilo of body weight, which is ridiculous, but it has been known, like particularly over like an Ironman or something like that, which might be 8, 9, 10 hours long. So there's quite a range there, and that's why you kind of need to dial that in or learn about what works for you. And it takes a little bit of time to do that. But as a ballpark, then I think I would try to stick to your normal caffeine intake, irrespective of where you are in the world. So, you know, for the guys in the UK, for example, we're going to be riding through the night, of course. So I don't think you necessarily need to try and smash caffeine, let's say, over that overnight period. It's certainly going to come to the fore, probably as you come into the morning, when you would naturally maybe have a coffee anyway. You might double strength that coffee if you like, because given, you know, you've been pedaling for maybe 12 hours by that point. But I think the level of caffeine intake and your caffeine routine should probably stay something similar to what you might do, you know, on a day-to-day basis anyway. The one caveat to that would be that, or at least to help you think about that in terms of thinking about how long between coffees or caffeine in or your whatever format you're taking the caffeine in, because you can also get it in sports drinks as well, and Red Bull and things like that, is to think about how long it's going to last in your bloodstream. And it actually stays in there for quite a fair amount of time. You know, if we think about the recommendations to stop drinking caffeine after maybe like 2 or 3 in the afternoon, that's why, because it can then impact your sleep. So it stays in there for quite a while. So a good approach, again, if I'll take the UK as an example, but you might have something like a strong coffee before you start the event, or just, you know, a few minutes before you start the event, if that's suitable, depending on what format it is, or even during the first hour, if you're certainly in it for the long haul. That can be quite strong, that coffee. So it's like a bolus of caffeine that you're giving the body. And then after that point, you can just top up for the next however long you're doing the events. And I think for the guys who are doing the 6 hour, it might be, you know, you could, after maybe 3 hours or 4 hours, you could be thinking about another coffee or another intake of caffeine, whether that's through sports drinks or whatever. For the guys doing the 12 and 24 hour, then I think it's going to be very much how you feel. Bear in mind, you've probably got 4, 5, 6 hours, and again, it's very individual how long it lasts in your bloodstream, but you've got about a 4 to 6 hour window, very broadly speaking, for when the caffeine is going to be in there. So after that point, you need to think about giving yourself another dose of caffeine. Now, it doesn't have to be as big as the first dose. So you're kind of giving your body a bolus of caffeine, and then you know, giving it little shots, I suppose, if you like, after that point. And that would be my suggestion overall. And then and not to try not to change the pattern of coffee intake, because your body will be used to getting caffeine at certain points during the day or during the 24-hour cycle. So you can try and think about sticking to that, but like I say, it's very individual, and those are just very broad guidelines, I would say. One thing, and I guess this comes back to what Jules was saying anyway about your nutrition plan, is exactly that it needs to be a plan, and this isn't something that you can just fly, you know, do on the fly and think, oh, you know, that's roughly 30 grams of carbs or 60 here or whatever. Particularly for the longer events, and when I say the longer ones, I'm talking, you know, even the 6 hour as well as the 12 and 24. It's got to be very planned, but it needs some wiggle room as well, particularly the 12 and 24, because it'll start, what you want to eat will change, as you've said. And I think that goes along, the caffeine aspect of that goes alongside it as well. You can have a plan A, but you also need to be able to deviate from that as you see fit. But definitely start with a plan and have it written down almost next to you, so you know exactly what plan A is.
Yeah, I'd just like to double down on that emphasis, because that's something I'm going to be talking about shortly, is the need for planning, and it's in every aspect, guys. I know some people might signed up on a whim, and totally fair enough, it's January, not a lot much going on, but if you really want to enjoy the event, I think it's a thing to really kind of emphasise. If you want to enjoy it, plan, because I've done it any which way, guys, and I can tell you, you enjoy that much more when you feel like you're in control, and you've planned your nutrition and you're not going hypoglycemic. It's much more enjoyable when you're planned, trust me.
Sorry, Rich, and that plan, I would just say as well is, you've got to be eating regularly. So every 20 to 30 minutes, you've got to be having something, if not more frequently. And again, it depends on how you're feeling, of course. But that's the sort of time intervals that we need to be thinking about adhering to. And if you start to let one or two of those slip, say it goes an hour without you eating something, honestly, you will pay for it later. It's about staying on track and on plan as long as you can.
Absolutely. Good. Yeah, well, you save me some time with my chat later. That's good. Cool. Well, I think so. I would maybe say like 5 minutes for questions, because we have got quite a lot of other stuff to go on to, and Jules and Sam obviously it's in the middle of their working day, so they've got to get back to things. But if anyone's got any questions, there's various methods in which you can ask. Unmute yourself and ask away, or use the Zoom chat. But if anyone's got any questions, I'd say maybe we'll just take 5 minutes and then we'll let these guys go. Anyone's got any?
One thing that we didn't actually mention, or at least overall, is hydration, Rich.
Yeah, sorry,
which is going to be critical here as well. So again, rough guidelines. You're looking at a bottle per hour. Very rough guidelines, and as we know, everyone's sweat rate and therefore how much water they're losing from their body during this type of thing is going to differ, markedly. Some people will be about 500 mils, some might be 2 litres an hour or something like that, depending on whether you've got your fan on or what sort of environment you're in. So I think, rough guidelines, 500 mils, maybe 750 mils, very easy. Have a bottle per hour as a very rough estimate for your fluid intake. And you can get that obviously as part of a carbohydrate drink. So you can have some carb powder, and that's your fluid as well. So you kind of hitting like 2 birds with 1 stone there. Or you can think about using, and you should do this anyway, probably using an electrolyte tablets or something with sodium in, so that you are replacing the sodium that you are losing through your sweat. And obviously that's going to be really important, particularly for the longer duration events, 6, 12 and 24 hours, because your overall sweat rate is going to be, or the amount of fluid that you're losing is going to be much greater simply through the duration that you're pedaling for. And therefore the amount of sodium that you're going to be losing is also going to be greater. Things like, the Science and Sports is a good example from the UK, or High Five tablets are okay, but they only have about 200 milligrams of sodium in. The higher strength stuff from Precision Hydration, there might be other brands as well that I'm not mentioning, but Precision Hydration typically they're the ones that everyone thinks of. They go up to 1500 milligrams of sodium in them, so that's a good option if you know that you're a particularly heavy sweater. If you've got chance, and this might be useful in terms of planning, if you have a chance before the event, just ride on your turbo for an hour or 2 hours, something like that. Weigh yourself beforehand and afterwards, also work out how much fluid you've actually taken in to the body during that hour or two, and then you can start to think about what your sweat rate is per hour. So the reduction in body weight, taking into account how much fluid you've actually put back into the system in that hour or two that you're riding for, you can then work out how much fluid you're using. There's plenty of calculators that will help you do that on the internet as well, or instructions if I've not explained that particularly clearly. But that might help plan your fluid intake during this type of event. And again, for the 6, 12 and 24s, like, it's going to be critical that you have a nutrition plan, in the days leading up to it, on the day, but also a hydration plan to go with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think doing that sweat test is a really good idea, because let's face it, it's the sort of thing you only have to do very periodically, and it's not going to change dramatically, I wouldn't have thought. And so for the fact that it might take to do it once, it's super useful information that you've got in the bag, for a long time, basically. Sorry, Sam, is there anything else that you think that we need to know up front?
Not up front. I think the main thing is to have a plan. Always have a plan, and start eating, as Jules said, start eating or drinking, whatever that needs to be, straight away. So even you've been on the bike 15 minutes, you might not think you need to eat, but seriously, get on with it straight away. Don't wait for an hour, because it's going to come back to bite you. Otherwise, you're just behind the curve, essentially. But I think if you've got a solid plan in place, then that'll go far and give you reassurance and confidence in what you're doing as well during the event. Yeah,
I think that's a big point. Taking away some of the anxiety, because particularly a long-ass event like these, it's easy to feel a little bit overawed by it all, and just putting together some sort of plan like we discussed, it can help it feel a little bit more manageable, help break it down. But yeah, guys, the forum is open, so if anyone's got any questions, nutrition and hydration related, please do fire away. The inevitable tumbleweed for a minute or two. It's a safe space, guys. Please don't be afraid.
So I suppose if there's no questions, then feel free to, you can drop us an email as well. It's either Sam or Jules at totalendurancenutrition.com. And then you can also get us on Instagram. So it's total_endurance_nutrition on Instagram. So we can respond to questions there as well, if needed. And I guess if anyone's got questions, Rich, then they can direct them to you as well, and you can put on to us and put us in contact. It's no problem.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, whilst people are perhaps having a think or perhaps typing, let me just talk a little bit more about the workout. And if Jules and Sam are happy to just hold on for a couple of minutes, then they might get some input. So just coming back to the workout, guys. So the idea behind it is about just introducing you to some sort of pacing levels. The first two steps that we were being on previously. So if you look at my screen, 130 watts, 140 watts, that's a 5% difference essentially, up from 65% of FTP to 70. They're both basically zone 2. Okay, we'll be talking about training zones very briefly in a bit, but around 65% for the 24-hour as a super general target, maybe even lower, okay, and then just a touch higher for the 12-hour event, but not by much, guys. It's still a bloody long way. Ultimately, it comes with those sorts of events, it comes down to not only just managing your effort, managing the nutrition and hydration, all of it together, and as Sam described, staying ahead of the curve, not going a little bit too hard when you see your rival kind of overtaking you, perhaps. The step that we're in now is just an idea for those doing the 6-hour event. So we're at around 80% of FTP, and this is very much the top end of pacing, I would suggest. You know, we're used to training Ironman and half Ironman athletes, so we're usually much more conservative than this in our suggestions. But let's face it, when it gets to the final hour, you know, you can really pick it up. And I think that leads me on to another point. You know, ultimately your pacing should be about getting within fighting distance of the finish line. It's much better to finish strong and maybe be a bit too conservative and finish with a bit of extra energy. Not that you'll have that if you're doing the 24-hour one, but it's better to finish, you know, perhaps having been a bit too conservative than go too crazy and die 1,000 deaths in the last. Because I promise you, you will lose so much more time or distance if you've gone out too hard than if you were to be a little bit too conservative. So at the moment we're at about 80% of FTP, and then the final step, the longest step, which is where you're going to get a bit of a blow on, you're going to get up to around sweet spot for the 3-hour event, which again is quite aggressive pacing. You know, that's just sub-threshold, but you know, give it a go. You know, know what your current fitness is like. You know, these sort of suggestions are for those people that are kind of trained in a dedicated way for this sort of thing, and their fitness is tip top. Right, let's have a little. So, anyone had a chance to think of any questions that they want to ask, or should we allow the Total Endurance Nutrition team to head on? Okay. Cool. Well, just remember, guys, if you can ask, if you think of anything after the fact, either drop them an email, you can drop us an email at the online events company, or you can use our React email address, whatever. Just do what you need to get us the information, and we'll respond to you. But I just want to say a massive thanks to Jules and Sam for joining us. I think that's some pretty crucial information there, particularly for those that are doing the community events who are perhaps a little bit less experienced. And as they say, plan, guys. It'll be worth it, I promise you. Thanks very much, guys.
No problem. Thanks, Rich. Good luck,
Cheers,
everyone.
Rich. Yeah, good luck.
Take care, guys.
Cheers.